Chapter 14 Negotiations.
What's going on?
Asked Lily White, a bit bleary. Much to the dwarves' fury, Lily White, though poisoned and thought dead, had awoken, and walked into the dwarves' living room just as they were trying to celebrate their victory.
"Why are you alive?"
demanded Stumpy.
"You're supposed to be dead."
I was dead?
Asked Lily White.
"Yeah,
Said Stumpy.
and that's how we liked you."
"Fuzzy bottoms!" shouted Tricky. "That double-crossing, no-good swindler robbed us blind with fluky poison apples. What a load of crack!"
"Well, if her apple was a dud, it looks like we get to do this the messy way,"
said Stumpy. "Yeah, Stumpy," said the emo Clingy. "Cut her head off." Stumpy wheeled himself toward Lily White, though he couldn't get at her very fast, because he was only using one hand. Lily White, for her part, was still groggy and a bit imbalanced. It made for an unsettling, slow-speed chase. Huncules burst through the door. "Stop!" he ordered. "She's too hot to kill." "Hey!" said Bumpy in his squeaking voice. "It's the Queen's slave." "No longer," said Huncules, adjusting his crown. "I am King Huncules, the first king of all the queendom." Lily White screamed.
Ah! That's the guy that tried to kill me.
"Duh,"
said Dummy stupidly.
"you didn't say the guy who tried to kill you was the king."
This is a queendom.
Said Lily White.
There's no king.
"Yes, my dear," said Huncules. "But the queen is dead, and she made me the new king. And now, my dwarf subjects," said the king, with his hand stretched before him, "I demand that you unhand that girl and give her over to me." "No way," said Tricky. The short dwarf walked up to Huncules and pointed right in his face. "We poisoned that girl," pointing to Lily White now. "Fair and square. She's ours to kill how we see fit."
You poisoned me?
Asked Lily White, fear and anger mingling in her voice. "We sure did," said Tricky proudly. "Paunchy and Nasty gave their lives to kill you."
Paunchy and Nasty are dead?
Asked Lily White, appalled. "Yeah," said Tricky, "and we thought you were dead too."
"It's not nice tricking people like that,"
said Lumpy, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's my job," said Tricky. "Speaking of which," he turned to Huncules, "you say you're royalty?" "Yes," said Huncules, "and I order you to hand over that girl." "Just wait a minute," said Tricky slowly. "You want the girl. We have the girl. Maybe we can make an arrangement." Tricky circled around Huncules. "What," asked Huncules, "do you have in mind?" "We need something valuable," said Tricky. He snapped his fingers as though making a decision. "Jewels! Lots of them!" "Well," said Huncules, thinking for a moment, "the Queen had some jewels." "Well, good," said Tricky, "because we need a whole cartload full of them." Huncules didn't say anything for a moment. Then a smirk crossed his face. "Very well," he said. "A small price to pay for a foxy broad." At that moment, Drunky came into the room with an empty mug and announced that they were officially out of mead. We'll need mead, too, said Tricky. Lots!
Stop negotiating for me!
Cried Lily White.
I'm sure he's the guy that tried to murder me in the forest. You've gotta believe me.
Everyone acted like she hadn't said anything. I'll send a whole cartful of mead, too, said Huncules. All right, said Drunky happily. That'll last us till tomorrow if you get it here tonight. It'll be my first act as king, said Huncules. Now wait a minute, said Tricky, shaking his head. We're not gonna just hand this girl over to you like that. I didn't just spring out of a hole in the ground yesterday.
Yeah, that's right,
said Lily White gratefully.
I knew you dwarves weren't that heartless.
As I was saying, said Tricky loudly, before I was so rudely interrupted, I'm not just gonna give this girl over on your word alone. How do we know we'll get the goods?
Yeah,
said Stumpy.
we'll need some collateral.
Collateral, you say? Said Huncules, stroking his chin. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Why, I have some collateral for you. One of my finest men, my general. Huncules stepped outside and called out some orders to have the general brought to him. A couple of swordsmen brought the general inside and dumped the unconscious man onto the floor. Huncules waved the men away. I don't know, said Tricky. He looks like he's in pretty bad shape. He's fine, said Huncules with a dismissive wave. He just got knocked out in the battle. He'll be fine. He's fine. After so many fines, Bumpy laughed and said, You know, Tricky, maybe he is fine. Yeah, said Huncules. He is fine. A quick check showed that the general still had a pulse.
What kind of general gets himself knocked out during a battle?
Stumpy growled.
A great general, that's who,
said Huncules, stooping down and putting an arm around the limp man's shoulder.
He's a war hero. He saved my life. I'd do anything for this guy.
Fine, said Tricky. You'll get this guy back when we get our just rewards.
Sure, yeah,
said Huncules, pulling his arm off the general, whose head fell roughly to the floor.
I really want him back. He's like a brother to me, so I'll come to get him as soon as I can. And tell you what,
Huncules had a broad grin on his face now.
If your wagons don't show up by noon tomorrow, well, you can just kill him. That's how committed I am to our new friendship.
The dwarves cheered. Many felt that this was a win-win situation for them. All right, sister, said Tricky, grabbing Lily White's arm and throwing her toward Huncules. You're his problem now. Meet your Prince Charming.
What, him?
Said Lily White through tears of anger.
He's not a prince, and he's definitely not charming. A prince should be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous.
Huncules was leading her outside now.
Kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. This guy's none of those things.
Yeah, said Tricky, but this ain't the Boy Scouts, so he's all you get. Good luck and have a good life. And with that, Tricky slammed the door in Lily White's face.
But what about my grandmother?
Asked Lily White weakly.
She still needs her medicine.
I'm pretty sure your grandma's dead,
said Huncules, knowing nothing about the situation.
Oh no!
Cried Lily White. Huncules put a comforting arm around her shoulder.
That's all right. There.
He put a hand on her cheek.
Now, my lady, we can share true love's first kiss.
What makes you think this is true love?
Shouted Lily White.
You tried to kill me! I hate you forever!
But nobody listened or cared. Huncules, having kidnapped the palest girl in the land, quickly married her, making his claim to the throne a bit more legitimate. Some said that it wasn't right to have the king giving all the commands, while there was a perfectly good queen. But most accepted the situation, as Huncules was so cool and the old queen was so lame. Huncules lived happily ever after. The end.